Okay, everyone, I think we'll get started on the keynote. Thanks everyone for coming. This has been a great couple of days. We have learnt on the job as the technical kind of issues kind of came and went. I have to thank, of course, my co-organisers for doing such an amazing job. We've had to have two people behind the scenes on each stream to deal with unexpected eventualities. We got Zoom bombed yesterday and survived, so I think that's certainly we're kind of battle tested here. That was an interesting experience. We've also had some great discussions. I think that's been really kind of wonderful. Clearly it takes us a little while to warm up, doesn't it, when we're after we see a kind of online talk, but we've actually had people jumping in and asking questions, which has been really great as well. So I've really liked that. And we even also had a wonderful after work yesterday, hosted expertly by Kia Hook, who managed to kind of shuffle us off into different breakout rooms and back again. And we ended it all with a group karaoke ABBA performance, which I think I will remember at least for some time. But we move on to, I would say that the best till last, but as I say, some of the papers have been really excellent. So Irina, you actually have a bit of competition to be the best in the conference, but it's, I'm sure, something you will actually achieve, because Irina, your work is obviously a great inspiration to many of us. If you're not aware of her work, Irina Shklovski, who has just moved to the University of Copenhagen, has specialized in thinking about the relationship between power and communication technologies in different ways and in lots of varied situations, and was really thinking about these difficult issues way before any of us in the HCI community broadly were. So it's almost a case of like we've caught up to where Irina was. So Irina's going to speak. I'm not sure how long you're going to speak for, but what I'm hoping is we'll have a little bit of time at the end to have a bit of discussion as well. We'll use the same format as we did before. But before we do that, can we just do a round of applause for all of us for surviving this online experience? Okay, wonderful. Can I unmute you right now? Let's see. Hi, Irina.
Hi.
Hi, great. Well, I'll hand over to you. Have you got some slides?
I do have some slides. I actually pre-recorded the talk, and then yesterday I realized I needed to change a bunch of it because of all the super awesome things that were happening. So I don't have a pre-recorded talk now because there was no time to re-record it. So here I am. I'm going to try to give a keynote without pre-recording, and we'll see how well it goes. So forgive me for sort of suddenly ending up winging it, but yesterday's sort of the Zoom bombing and everything else fit really well with the kinds of things that I wanted to talk about. So let's see how it goes. And also, Barry, thank you for such fantastic and kind words about my work. So the talk I brought today for this, that I prepared for this today, is actually quite new. I've been working on this set of ideas for a few years, and now, just now, sort of fairly recently, we're starting to think about, okay, what is all of this? What does all this mean, and how to actually make this work? So the title of my talk is Creepy Technologies: The Perils of Visibility in a Datafied World. And I'm going to make a kind of an out there argument, and then we'll see how I can manage to hold it up. But let me start first by saying that this has been an amazing experience, actually. Amazing talks and conversations and all the various topics across 3 tracks. It's quite incredible. And it really has felt good to spend time with colleagues. And yet there's something about this conference that is unusual and perhaps sometimes a little bit uncomfortable, depending on the person. So for the last 2 days, I've not only listened to people talking about their research, and now, since this is a talk about creepiness, I'm going to do my best to try and creep all of you out a little bit. But for the last 2 days, I also got the glimpse so many people's private homes. Just a sort of a wall hanging here and a bookshelf there, perhaps a bed neatly made in the background. All of this is something that you wouldn't normally see in a conference setting. So this is a stock Zoom image, but was there a moment when you thought it might be of this conference and reflexively looked for yourself in the images? Thinking about what's in your background? I mean, it feels a little bit intrusive to pay too much attention to what's in everyone's homes, but at the same time, I'm curious. I can't help, and I suspect I'm not alone. I can't help it. I want to see because it's there. And suddenly you get to see sides of people you don't normally see. Some of us use pre-made images as backgrounds, similar to mine, which incidentally obscures the wheel of a bicycle hanging on the wall right behind my head. Instead of this relative anonymity of a conference center, here we are in our hastily constructed home offices, perhaps a bit uneasy with making a little bit more visible of ourselves. We've all made some choices in the last 2 days, what to reveal, what to conceal, how to best arrange the camera and the screen, whether to turn it on at all. We're trying to maintain some semblance of professional decorum, understandably limited given the circumstances. But there's nothing to say. This conference has been very successful, but it's not been without incident. So the initial Zoom bombing with unpleasant imagery, unexpected, but probably not unthinkable. Here we are, we're suddenly making our talks available to the world at large, and not to a significant but exclusive group of people able to pay a significant amount for the privilege of listening to each other's talk. And I think in some ways, by making this public, we fall victim to the paradox of the online world. We're simultaneously visible to more people than we might expect. And yet, at the same time, we're probably being heard by fewer people than we would like. Unfortunately, the audiences are never equivalent. So somewhere also perhaps in the back of your mind, there's probably also like a little bit of a little niggling thought that we're all using Zoom to do this. And you probably heard that there's something not particularly great about this company, at least on the account of privacy. Although what that might be and whether we should worry about it actually is not really all that clear sometimes. So many little momentary discomforts in doing this online conference thing. But there's such pleasure in seeing all of you and getting really nerdy together. And that pleasure kind of trumps the concerns, and the concerns are easy to dismiss. Yes, some of this online conferencing can be a little bit creepy here and there, sort of. But it does no harm. We're all colleagues, professionals. This is our domain after all. The sunlight of our environment should feel like a second skin. We study this. Look at the positives, right? So here I am, and I'm here to talk about this creepy feeling. Some years ago, I wrote a paper about creepiness in technology, and since then I've been trying to work out how to define this creepy feeling, how to operationalize it, how to study it, and what, if anything, might this concept be good for. So today I'm going to make an argument that creepiness, it's an uncomfortable affective state, and that it's unavoidable in a digital society where participation comes with requirements of ever more increasing levels of visibility through data disclosure. That niggling feeling of discomfort we have grown so good at dismissing, that is intrinsic to the construction of our digital societies. Our technology is not creepy by accident. It's creepy by design. Let me explain. So whenever I talk about the fact that all of our technology is increasingly creepy, these days, all I get from audiences is this kind of tired laughter. Yeah, it's creepy. The shoe is following me around the internet. Because sort of between the Nest systems that suddenly advise residents to evacuate due to an impending nuclear strike, or just scaring parents. The misbehaving, whispering, and laughing virtual assistants. Those shoes or whatever else that's following you around the internet or Facebook, recommending that you add as a friend that guy sitting across from you at an awkward dinner party. These are all daily interactions with technology, and they're often disconcerting to various degrees. And to some extent, most of us have gotten inured to this feeling of like, ugh, that was weird, but you know, that's okay. Well, the first few cases that I just mentioned are direct hacks and are legal violations. I'm actually more interested in instances where no laws have been broken. Alexa laughing or whispering is not exactly harmful. It may be weird, but that's probably it. Neither that laughter nor the sort of eerily accurate friendship recommendations or targeted advertising, none of that actually typically circumvents privacy settings and typically does not exceed stated purposes of data collection. I mean, you might be surprised just how much data is collected purposefully and you've agreed to it, but that's a different point. And yet, still doesn't feel right. There's something about it. It's not quite comfortable. So what's going on? All of these technologies are apparently harmless until we peek at the vast networks of data extraction, surveillance, and commercialization they require. How does that make you feel? But wait a minute. Well, it's even before you realize just how vast the networks of resources and people are necessary for a device to respond to, hey, Alexa, at least mildly coherently. You think you know this. We are professionals. We know this. We know most of this. But look, even knowing this, we still don't feel quite right sometimes. And we still have to ignore that feeling that something's not quite right. We learn to ignore problems because thinking about them makes getting life done kind of untenable. So for me, creepiness is sort of an uncomfortable affective response, but it's often difficult to articulate. This is often an embodied physical aspect to the feeling. So you describe it as a shiver, a feeling of cold down the spine, a little bit of like, ugh. Unless you've sought it out through horror films or haunted houses, feeling creeped out is not a particularly enjoyable experience. But, you know, on Halloween, it can be fun. Where does it come from? Creepy is a kind of sense of wrongness. It disrupts the familiar in ways that are invasive. A laughing Alexa in your kitchen is certainly not a familiar sound, at least so far. Yet, however tinged with wrongness, this feeling is also something that begs to be ignored. It's a vague sense of discomfort. It demands an explanation so you can get over feeling uncomfortable. So at the core of creepy, there's this question of agency. The who, the what, the why. What is responsible and why is it that the sensation is being evoked? And you have to create an explanation. For an encounter with the technology to be experienced as creepy, whatever is happening must violate expectations. You expect something to happen, it's no longer particularly startling. It also has to violate personal boundaries. It's unexpected, but it doesn't touch you, it's not that creepy. Alexa laughing is creepy because it happens unexpectedly in your kitchen, in the intimate heart of the home. But more than that, whatever is happening must present as an ambiguity of threat. Nothing overtly threatening about the laughter or the targeted advertising, but there is that sense of wrongness in the experience. You don't know whether you should be worried about it or not. Maybe. Why are technologies getting increasingly creepy? So I put this little clip in So for the moment, okay, you can't hear the audio. I'm not sure how to make the audio work, but all it is Eric Schmidt saying, hey, at Google, we say there's a creepy line, and our policy is to get just up to the creepy line and not cross it. And there's laughter, and everybody sort of is, nodding their heads. But really, if back in 2013, in this interview, Eric Schmidt very famously claimed that his company seeks to do this creepy line and not cross it, shouldn't we be pretty good at this now? And what's up with the sense of wrongness? Where does this come from? It's still there. It's not going away. So despite Google's efforts, I would argue that in this digital world, creepy is intimately tied to notions of visibility. And all of our technologies are built around assumptions of visibility, about the idea that we need ever more granular data collection. And that's intended to create images of ourselves to be consumed by all these actors, most of whom we don't even know about. And that includes some fairly alien agencies that are coming into play that are machine intelligences, machine learning, AI automated decision making. And in some ways, this is by definition a kind of a creepy setup that we've created. We have a situation where participation in a digital society makes increasing visibility, that is, disclosing ever more fairly personal data, the making of ourselves visible and parsable in specific ways, a requirement. Every so often, I try to install a piece of software and then cringe at all the information it attempts to extract from me. Really, T-Timer app, you want my birth date? Why do you need my birth date? To count time. How often have you asked yourself that? And yet, we give it a birth date and we use it to count time. Because sometimes it feels like it's too hard to keep track of all of these things. Most of the time, there's no real way around it. You may not know why you must provide the information, but provide you do. And eventually, the less you think about it, the better you sleep. Some people call this the privacy paradox. I think it's just basically survival, and there's nothing paradoxical about it. There are different kinds of visibility, of course. Who gets to see what, when, for what purpose varies and changes. And visibility has consequences. Not all of these are necessarily negative or positive. They change. Being visible means offering something up for different forms of judgment, and this requires preparation. Unexpected visibility can be at best mildly disconcerting and at worst devastating. So yesterday, in a Zoom bombing example, that's a different kind of visibility. Suddenly something became visible and available for action to people you did not expect, who reacted and responded in ways that you did not expect. The thing is, as social creatures, we think about who is able to see what, when, and how. In cramped social spaces, we learn to afford each other the averted gaze. The imagined space of invisibility that allows us moments free of the threat of being judged, for indecision, for missteps and errors, for explorations, for occasionally stepping out of the expectations that predefine us to others, for playing. Think of yourself walking down the street. Think of yourself having walked down the street a few months ago, maybe. And think of the times when you looked away because you felt that perhaps you shouldn't be looking at that person doing whatever it is they're doing, affording them their privacy. It's an act ingrained in us. As anyone who's ever felt nervous before giving a public talk knows, certain kinds of visibility can be crushingly difficult to bear. Being judged, or just imagining about being judged on what is not intended for visibility, the decor of the random wall in your apartment, accidentally made visible to 100 known and unknown people in a Zoom call, or your sexual history revealed in an inappropriate context. It feels like a violation, just to different degrees. But if the consequences of the unexpected visibility are unclear, what are we to do? This is where creepy lives. In the moments where unexpected visibility is discovered, but there are really good arguments in place for why this may not be a problem, but in fact a benefit. The very discomfort of creepy is an excellent motivation for working out explanations and possible reasons for why resistance to new forms of visibility is unnecessary. Creepy begs for normalization through logical narratives of necessity. You have to explain to yourself why it's okay to reveal things. They're typically held close and private to a largely unknown audience. Of course, Facebook needs to know your birth date. How is it going to remind your friends about it? Fitbit has to upload your sleep and whatever other nocturnal activity in the cloud to offer you better functionality. Yes, Strava published your run and accidentally revealed your secret military base, but it's about community building. Think about it. So with every such normalization, the next and more invasive form of visibility becomes possible to explain away. Look, you've gotten used to wearing a device to bed to monitor your sleep. So, sticking a camera inside a cute Amazon Echo spot onto your bedside table because it's supposed to function as an alarm clock soon becomes okay too. In this way, creepy is intrinsic to the progressive construction of a data-driven society. Little steps forward that then can be explained away as probably okay. Because the fact is, as an effective state, creepy is not sustainable. It's too uncomfortable and too weird. But it is not enough to evoke a strong reaction, precisely because this causal connection, the why the sensation, it's not obvious. So creepy is that niggling fear of exposure, but without a clear path to knowing who might know and why, that would be a threat. And so it has to be dismissed. Because in order to live in the world, we have to assume that it is possible to organize our behavior in such a way that interactions with the world are kind of benign at worst. No matter who and where, people are generally terrible at dealing with unexpected events. We are. Change is cognitively and physically exhausting, which is why most of us are so much more exhausted in the last couple of months, because the event that we're living through is so weird and unexpected. So if we take for granted that performing mundane, everyday activities is generally safe, then we can gather ourselves to cope successfully with an occasional upheaval. As the mundane and the everyday becomes fully or partially digital, we also create data exhaust, at times simply by breathing or having a heartbeat. In order to continue living in this world, we must assume that the digital terrain we navigate is as benign to us as the physical terrain often appears to be. Things get creepy when interactions with technology result in a violation of this expectation. The expectation that the world is predictable, largely explainable, mostly understandable, and generally a mild environment that we can traverse. So as we become aware of new visibilities, we also need to find ways to adjust how we navigate the world, sometimes in unexpected ways. When talking about surveillance, power, and the panopticon, digital as it may be, Foucault has argued that visibility is a trap. I want to say that visibility actually is a trade-off, because when something becomes visible, something else must fade from you. There is no omniscience. It would be really nice to have it, but it's just not possible. Visibility is relational. When we think with what about us may be visible or knowable by known or unknown others, we have expectations about what this knowing will mean for us in the now or in the future. Most of us want some say in that future, and creepy happens when our technologies fail in hiding ways in which our agency is subordinated to data production and then discounted. Sometimes this can be devastating because we're also haunted by data. We are haunted by the data we produce and data about us. And sometimes this haunting can be terrible. Designing data-intensive technologies means managing visibility as a strategic process. making enough visible so that the folk explanations can be quickly assembled to deal with the creepiness of it all. But these folk explanations have to be reasonable. So I wonder if it's possible to design for a kind of accountable visibility. Because when we design possibilities for interaction in technologies, I wonder, what are the relational conditions possible? What are the obligations and responsibilities that are signaled when you create interactions in technology? What is being made visible to whom and under what conditions? These are important questions. They're important questions to be asked in the design process. What obligations and responsibilities are implied in this new data relationship that you've created? Whether it's visible or not, assume it will become visible accidentally, and what will happen then? Can this new visibility you are creating be safely taken for granted as people navigate the digital terrain of life? What can be taken for granted? Because it's not empowering to have to think about more things than we already have to think about. All data harvesting technology is just a little bit creepy, sometimes a lot. And what I want to say is, if we're going to be haunted by data, let's make those hauntings gentle, and let's find ways to dispel the ghosts. Thank you.
Thank you, Irina. That was very thoughtful, lovely keynote. So the way we'll do this is, as we've been doing it, please put your questions and comments into the chat, and then we can demute you, and then you can ask your question there. But thanks, Irina. That was a great talk. Well, it always takes a little while for people to think of questions. So before that, I can jump in with one, which is, so in the 50s, it's kind of forgotten now, but like so many things, we sort of follow a little bit the American legal system, and there's obviously lots of good and bad with that. But along with the right to privacy, in the 50s, there was this idea about the right to publicity. And it was this idea that citizens should have this ability to get publicity to issues and concerns that they had. And so that you had to have this, you can have obviously this right to privacy, but you also actually had to have the opposite as well. And that's kind of, I think, a little bit kind of forgotten, but really has come into focus a lot with these so many different new digital technologies where we can get this kind of publicity in some ways. But I mean, I think as you point out there, I feel this kind of uncomfortableness because there's no way of getting that publicity without also exposing some of yourself. And sometimes there's aspects of yourself you might not want to you want to keep private. So there's this kind of dilemma, isn't it, that we all, and particularly being academics, we enjoy the sound of our own voice, don't we? So we want people to listen, but then of course, how do we deal with that situation where we also want to kind of maintain some privacy as well?
Well, there's 15 minutes of fame that everybody in the world can have. At least Andy Warhol promised us. And then there's, I think, having a voice, and those tend to be different things. And I think what you mean by publicity is having a voice, having to being able to voice concerns and being able to voice ideas. And as academics, we have a voice. A lot of people don't. We have a platform, but when we speak, we have expectations of audience, and when that expectation of audience becomes wildly different, other structures come into play. I think if you look at it, at least in relatively recent surveys in Western countries, what you find is women are far less likely and far less willing to share anything online. than men. Well, in part because tweeting is not exactly, tweeting has the potential of becoming rather uncomfortable. I think in some ways, yeah, we want privacy, we want publicity, we want to manage it. But the question always is, what are the stakes and what are the conditions under which we're actually operating? And given the way visibility and data have been washed out, I think it's very hard to figure out what to expect and how to act. And so maybe you have a voice, but what that means is changing. Marianne, you have a question about deliberate invisibility.
We should maybe let Doug ask a question first.
Oh, Doug, sorry, I missed you. Doug, you talk about business models. Is creepiness the price of free services? I think maybe it's part of the logic of data that we've assumed has to be in place. I don't think it's a requirement. I think it has to be a requirement, but it is right now. So I think perhaps, yeah, it's the price of free services, but actually it's also the price for many not free services as well.
Right. But when you pay for something, you can at least, I mean, at least when you have competition or a market, you can at least choose the less creepy products. Where am I?
Yeah, not sure what just happened.
We have sound at least. That's good.
All right.
Yeah, because I mean, if I have two products and I pay for both, I can, and if they are sort of fairly equal, I can choose the less creepy one, right? If I choose to pay for this service. But if I
assuming
really,
you know,
sorry,
assuming you have a good idea of what are the data flows involved,
right,
assuming you actually have that choice. When was the last time you looked at, you know, TVs on sale? I don't think there's any non-smart TVs available anymore.
right.
Sometimes at this point, there are certain things for which it doesn't matter how much you want to pay. You may not have a choice.
Right, but you should, at least you have more power than potential power as a customer than if you don't. I mean, it's also a difference between different kinds of societies. I mean, if you look at sort of if you divide the world in three, then between totalitarian societies and sort of fully capitalist societies like the US and this in between, or this sort of partly state, partly open model we have in Europe, then you have different sort of opportunities for making choices.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
It's like with television. I mean, remember the first time I came to the US and started watching television, it was just crappy. Everything's crappy, was crappy because it was based on ads, right? So it kind of, it spirals towards crappiness. While we see the same in Europe also, where the sort of the national televisions that are paid by the state, they maintain some kind of quality, like BBC and similar. While the sort of the commercial televisions, they spiral towards crappiness, right?
Well, maybe. I think you have to think about these days, privacy is something that certainly you can purchase. But privacy has always been something that was afforded to people more in power in some ways. And visibility was afforded to people that were more in power. I think we can come back to also Barry's question here. Power means having a voice in publicity, but having a choice about that voice in publicity and having a choice about what might or might not be visible or what to make or not make visible. And these same choices, or having a choice about either visibility or not, the choices about it can be taken away. And the poorer people are, the harder it is to be in the position to make those choices.
Exactly, because you watch crappy television instead of having HBO, paying for HBO, right?
Sure, and that, you know, that being the most important concern. But you're right, absolutely. Whether it's television or municipal services or where you live.
Yeah, so it's about power then. I mean, I just wanted to sort of involve, sort of, let's talk also about the power, sort of.
Absolutely.
Yeah, very interesting. I like creepiness as a topic. Very nice, thank you.
Marianne, I like the notion of deliberate invisibility.
Thank you, Irina, for a lovely talk, and thank you for putting some more words and articulating the darker sides of how we encounter technologies today. So I was just wondering about your thoughts on how can we counteract this as a research community? You know, because someone are really deliberately also hiding stuff and seduces us to think that no data is being gathered, right? So what should we do? What is our research agenda?
Well, I think in many ways it's about thinking about what we're doing more closely. You know, that echo spot clock that I had in the slides earlier on, little cute thing that you can put on next to your bed because it's an alarm clock. It can be anywhere. When I first saw it, I thought, oh my God, they shortcutted creepiness because it's so cute. It's so cute that you're going to forget that the damn thing is also really creepy and it's sitting on your bedside. I think it's important for us to think about asking questions about what kinds of visibilities we're creating by creating technologies and whether those are warranted and what are we putting in place for those to be managed is an important question. These are important questions to ask. Deliberate invisibility then becomes a question of ethical decision making. That is something we have to talk about. That is something that needs to be considered, rather than saying, "Oh, that's how everybody else is doing it." And those are changes that need to be introduced in how we train designers, and they need to be introduced in how we think about the relationship between the systems we design and the users that will use them, and what are the responsibilities that we have in that process.
Thank you.
I think Julia has a question about the lockdown.
So
yeah, well, sorry, it's less question about lockdown. It was just interesting to have your reflection on that, Irina. Now my question is really whether informed consent is something of the past. I mean, who can remember what they've consented to? You know, all the different apps and online, online things that we're a part of. Who can keep track of that? I mean, maybe there's an app to track what you've consented to. And it's all very well having GDPR and being able to ask for your data to be withdrawn, but you have to remember who you've given data to or allowed data to be tracked. I'm just wondering if this is a historical concept that we're still holding on to because we don't like the thought of not having it.
Informed consent has an interesting history to it, and it's, especially in Europe, it's deeply tied to the notion of informational self-determination. The idea that with given enough information, people should be given the opportunity to make their own decisions. It's key to informational self-determination. The notion of self-determination that is enshrined in the legal system is key to notions of democracy. And yet at the same time, there are assumptions that are built in here that I'm not sure are tenable, have ever really been tenable. What is consent? Consent is relational. I agree to you doing something. that means you have obligations towards me as I have obligations towards you. Consent is also a something that makes the assumption that I'm going to explain something to you and you will make a decision. But the way that consent has been used in with technology, it's become an excuse. There is no way that I can consent to giving data to all of these technologies that I use. I have no way to ever really predicting what these data are going to be used for and how that's ever going to affect me in any way, shape, or form. Really, I have no way of knowing what are some of the other things I may need to think about at the same time. Technologies are moving very fast. It's not about my education. It's not about how much I need to know. It's about the fact that consent is an excuse. It allows the companies that create technologies to just basically say, look, we asked, they said yes, we're all good, rather than spending time thinking about what are their obligations given what they're asking for. I'm not sure consent was ever really the right mechanism.
Thank you.
Can we jump over Miri? A very small looking Miri Louise has a question.
Yeah, I had two questions. So one of them is about if creepiness is equally just distributed or experienced, and the other question is more of like perhaps a historical context. If creepiness is something new, or if it has just become more visible.
So I love that. I love both of them. I love both of these questions because no, of course, creepiness is not equally distributed or experienced. I think all of us have different tolerances. I can't watch horror movies. I can't stand them. I cannot do it. I close my eyes. There are a lot of people that love the creepy feeling that the horror movies give them. I think there's a sense of there's definitely a kind of physical feeling that is associated with it. It's an effective response. We have different tolerances for things. And these tolerances come from our normative expectations. So tolerances come from different places. And that's why you can sort of predict, I think you can sort of say something will be creepier than something else, but only within certain set of experiences. And creepiness isn't a new thing, but the way visibilities through data have become such part and parcel of what we do and how we deal with the world, I think it's become exacerbated. And there are many, many more things that'll just creep you out just a little bit on a daily basis as you go about your life. That I think is something that's become more prevalent. Again, not a new thing, just uncomfortably common.
Thank you. Kia had a question next.
Sorry. I was unmuting at the same time as Mai was muting me. I think you can leave my question. I think it was partly discussed already. So leave my question.
Aww.
Okay, well, we'll come back to it later, maybe if we've got time. So Jonas was next.
Yeah, sorry, I was wondering about the familiarity you build on this concept and say that the affective states comes from breaks with the familiar, but I'm wondering if there's something more at work, because we can become accustomed to these intrusions, but they might not be less creepy just because of that. So,
yeah, I think you're right. Certainly, when the creepy experience first happens, it's about the break with the familiar. But there's also a question of agency that's deeply embedded in the notion of creepiness. And it's when that agency is undermined, but undermined in ways where there are good reasons for allowing it to happen, and yet it still makes you feel a little bit wrong. that too is very much creepy while still eventually becoming unfortunately familiar.
Okay, next is Alex, but he seems to have accidentally posted a paper abstract there on the question into the thread there. So maybe I'll let Alex actually ask the question.
Thanks, Barry. Gosh, I think it's so nice to like have this opportunity. You know, we wouldn't have had an opportunity to talk like this with a keynote speaker. So thanks, Irina. And I really liked the pace of your talk. And again, that's not the sort of thing I feel like we'd see in a Kai keynote. So that was nice. So I think kind of really building on that, I wanted to kind of, well, I guess I'm thinking with you rather than asking a kind of direct question. So when I think you just glossed over a term, hauntings, at the end of your talk. And that made me think about Derrida and his idea of ontology, that we might bring a kind of a version of Marxism with us to reflect back on our world continuously. So Marxism is always already a thing that's being enacted, and that made me think about the self, and what are we so affronted by in this contemporary moment in which data is everywhere and we're being inspected by late capitalist techno-scientific systems. And of course I'm affronted and I am creeped out by these things, but why should I imagine myself to be at risk in these ways? And I feel like that fear of what I understand to be the self is actually a consequence of those very things that I am affronted by. The self is the thing that is being enacted by these systems of late capitalism. And so we can't, it's an inescapable moment in which we're here. So how can we really justify that sense of being affronted by these things? We're all buying into it. I don't know if you have a response to that.
So I've been struggling a bit with Derrida's hauntology. Actually, I think there are better and less good treatments of it, and it's a complicated concept. I like the notion of haunted data, of being haunted by data, and I think it's our past selves or parts of ourselves we want to leave behind that stubbornly hang on sometimes and get reminded, and change is never easy. I think it's been made harder, given that leaving the past self behind is just much less of an option in many situations, and not all. And there's a certain privilege to that particular problem. But I like your notion also of what other selves are possible. I sort of think that in many ways, what happens is this constant debate of I am more than my data, but then don't you know about me? And there's some discussion in Ruha Benjamin's Race After Technology. She has a discussion of sort of this notion of skin deep presentations, of being seen or not being seen, and that seeing and not seeing can be difficult and terrible in many different ways for different reasons. And there's a sense that somehow we want the machine to really know us, but it only sees the skin. But seeing the skin comes with its own problems and its own assumptions. I think creepiness is about trying to figure out how do you live and how do you navigate an environment where you can't know what about you will trigger what kind of response. And it feels strange and slightly out of sorts. But we come from different kinds of privilege, and those kinds of privilege may or may not continue to keep us safe even in these unsettled moments. I think there is always a question of what other selves are possible, given the fact that we're haunted by data and are not able to quite as easily discard what's already been there. So there's also something to think about. But again, I've been thinking about this for several years, and it's a really difficult. There's so many threads that come together, and it's a difficult topic to really specify. This is about as clearly as I could make it, and it's taken me 4 years. So, work in progress.
Thank you.
Okay, Marika has a question next.
Yeah, I was just actually, and actually, even the stuff that was brought up then in between even made me more think, because you were just talking, Irina, about how there's these things around us that we might or might not be able to control, and at the same time there's talk here in the chat about the social fluff. Like Sophie was just posting that, and Kia as well, about the conferences and so on. But for me, it's like, I feel like isn't it the feeling of creepiness that actually gives us the control? I feel it's the moments when we don't have this sense of creepiness that we are out of control. Like that's the point when, and I'm not saying that even in a negative way, because I think we are surveilled much more than just in those moments that we feel this feeling of creepiness. So I think my question was aiming a bit towards that I was saying that when I'm here at home, I can, make the bed, and I can, really control, and I even can put in a background, and I can, do all these things. And when I get apps, I mean, at least I get the possibility of clicking things away, even though it might feel a bit creepy. While when I'm leaving my home, there's so many things that, like, for example, in Britain, the CCTV or other forms of surveillance that we have just completely incorporated. And I think that also includes surveillance or creepiness that others do. I mean, as you point out, Irina, we all check out each other's bedrooms right now, possibly. And so, I mean, we're constantly visible, we're constantly surveilled, we're constantly under scrutiny. And I guess to some extent we always have been. So yeah, I'm just wondering how you see that. That is creepiness not a good thing?
Well, I think there's a difference between creepiness and the presentation of self that we all work on. I think we certainly, and the uncertainties we deal with all the time. To go back to the final talk from the last session, the world's uncertain, and in order for us to navigate the uncertainties, we have to take a bunch of stuff for granted. So there's certain things that you just don't want to think about, and when you're forced to think about that, then you can't think about something else. I have a small head. There are only so many thoughts that fit into it at one time, and I think, yeah, certainly. I can control my presentation of self. Whatever situation you put me into, I will try and limit and manage things. And whether it's on the street or in a conference center or right now with a background, yes, that's what I'm doing. But creepiness to me is a sense of wrongness in an interaction where there shouldn't be, where suddenly you realize that you've lost that control in ways that are devastating. Let's think about it this way. As all academics, we know that no matter how good we are on stage, getting on that stage takes a bit of courage, and it's a bit of adrenaline. Some people handle it better than others. Some people worry more. You get better at it over time. Thing is, Getting on stage is a choice. And when it's not a choice, when you're suddenly dragged out onto stage without making that choice, that can feel like being flayed alive. That can feel terrible. So there's something about agency here that I think is key. That it's realizing that there's a part of you that's visible in ways you didn't know. And that visibility, that is, that makes you vulnerable. And creepy is that moment of suddenly feeling vulnerable and not being able to do anything about it, but not enough to care that much. And you can dismiss it. You can give yourself an explanation, convince yourself that it's okay, and move forward.
But then still it is better to have that than being not aware at all.
Sure.
And then decide
Sure.
not to care, kind of.
Sure. Oh, absolutely. But how useful is it if there's nothing you can do? You just know. So when I first started doing these studies, some of my participants, when we talked about data leakage on mobile phones, they just said, yeah, you know, now that I know about it, I just feel more uncomfortable using my phone. Use it the same way, but I just feel more uncomfortable doing it. Is it useful? I don't know.
I mean, I just think it's so interesting also that this creepiness emerges. Like, why is this so much always centered around technology, like digital technologies, while, you know, we make it as a joke, oh, someone could be like peeking through the window, but that's just something that's not talked about, you know. It's not talked, at least not in, well, I mean, clearly because also this is HCI, but apart from that, I mean, I think it's just a bit of the easy way out to just kind of then go back to, oh, it's the companies that are making us click on okay or put in our birth date. But instead, we go out, we write our names on lists, we send our kids to preschool where, you know, they can be followed around or whatnot, you know. I mean,
there's only so much that you can control your environment. You rely on the world more or less being, at least in Western countries and in environments that we inhabit, the world more or less being benign by and large. There are people for whom that's not the case, but I think having a sense of at least what you can control and suddenly finding out that is also gone, that can be really a difficult moment. I think that's where things become a little bit creepy. But yeah, you can't control everything. And yeah, of course you take risks. And of course every time I get up to give a talk, I worry. But you do it anyway.
So I think we're almost out of time, but we have time for one last question, I think. And there's a kind of Kia Alexandra Sophie question, which is about the relationship between your talk and this kind of online experience we've been having. And I wondered if maybe, Sophie, you were the last person to ask it. Do you want to ask the question?
Keep on pressing the wrong button. I always want to unmute myself. This is terrible. Sorry. I think we were discussing about how, like, kind of the social levels, I guess, of what other things and the conference brings as well, as like the social fluff, as so nicely put by Alexandra. But I think maybe we need to find ways. Maybe this is a way of doing this part, and then we need to find other ways of seeing each other and doing the fluff part. Maybe we need to separate things. No, this is not really a suggestion. But yeah, I'm not really sure if I'm catching that. I had another thing that was more thinking about, like, aren't we opening up for different ways of also different behaviors we're seeing right now, like peeping, leaving mid-discussion, just like turning around and just like leaving the room, or having like the empty screen left over, or just like clicking away the video to, I don't know, switch away and then come back. I mean, we're also like kind of performing a different way of like bringing other forms of creepiness maybe into our own behaviors, or we behave creepier than normal. It's not really clear. That was two different angles of this. Maybe you want to react on it, Irina.
Oh, back in like 20, 25 years ago, when computer mediated communication was just getting started, and people were saying, oh my God, you can, nobody on the internet knows you're a dog. And then suddenly it turned out that people can be even more brutal with each other, and even more terrible to each other. And somehow there's this notion of social control, that you adjust how you behave in social situations, and then once those social controls are gone, suddenly you just don't care if you're going to stand up in the middle of a call and or in the middle of a talk and walk out, or just ignore the whole thing altogether, because clearly nobody's going to pay attention, maybe. So on the one hand, yeah, what you're describing is a change in norms, and us sort of trying to figure out what are the new norms of being this way, and that's going to take time. I'm not sure if that's creepy in as much as it's just people trying to sort out what it means to be in these new situations, both socially and organizationally. What are the right ways of behaving, and what are the consequences of getting out of those right ways of behaving? How do you establish what are the right ways of behaving? Right. But at the same time, I think there is a sense where being social is relating to each other, and relating to each other is always becoming vulnerable to each other in some way or another. And that vulnerability is something that might need to be controlled. Some people are more willing to be more vulnerable than others. That's also a personal preference or a personality thing, or depending on who you are. And those vulnerabilities are something that may not be less. I think they change in online environments, but they're still there. And I'm not sure those are creepy either. I think creepiness really is, for me, in that space where before, there's a difference. There's a difference between saying, oh, look, it started out with like nearly 80 people, now it's 53. And, here I am thinking about it, lost so many people. What did I do? What did I say wrong? I should have been more entertaining, right? But then what if I then actually see who left when, and the people that are coming in and leaving suddenly find out that there is such an overview, and that overview also shows what else they went to do. Suddenly that starts looking creepy. Suddenly that was an unexpected bit of visibility that they didn't account for when they made their decisions about their behavior. And that visibility has put them into a completely different kind of vulnerable social position. It's strange. So I don't know, maybe I can get like a Zoom list of all the attendees when they showed up, when they left, and then I'll post it. It'd be great. This is how you make people visible, but it's also really creepy to figure out that people are actually paying attention to this.
Thank you, Irina.
Thank you all.
I think that's all the time we have. One thing I know about I've learned from running this event is that you need to get comfortable with silences when between when you want to wait for people to ask questions, and then you wait, and then of course everybody asks their questions like all at the end, and you'll see on the chat there that we've got this kind of explosion of conversation taking place at the same time as talking. So it's really exciting to see that. But I wanted to just, so before we end, just to thank Irina again for the wonderful talk and wonderful questions.
Thank you. And thank you so much for amazing questions and a great discussion. It's been really fun. And thank you for having me.
So thank you to all the session chairs. You did a great job. Thank you to all the presenters for Thank you for the audience, so you humouring us with this new technical experiment, which I think went okay-ish. But I think we come to the end. Everything will be available on YouTube later. So that's great. You can go in and kind of relive the talks again, and even this discussion again. But let's just do a round of applause, I think, for everyone who's involved. Thank you. Okay, now ends our scheduled program. So have a nice afternoon, guys. Thank you. Speak to you later.